Hello everybody. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the Bachmann HO scale James from the Thomas & Friends universe. But we're not going to be just looking at one James, we're going to be looking at three James. There are three versions of James in the Bachmann HO Thomas & Friends collection. So there is the original paint job James, which is the black engine. There is the red engine, which I think most people are familiar with James. And then there is the Busy Bee version of James that is in the center there and should be quite obvious, but it is the black and yellow striped James. So we'll take a detailed look at the red version of James, since I think that's probably the one most people are familiar with. And then after that, we'll just take a quick look at Busy Bee James and the black painted James. Okay, as we take a look at James, we can see that he is a tendered 260 steam locomotive. James's engine number is number 5, and he runs on the Northwestern Railway. So like all the engines in the Thomas universe, James is based on a real steam engine. And he's based on the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Class 28 steam locomotive. Now the Class 28 is an 060 steam locomotive, and as we said just a couple minutes ago, James is a 260 locomotive. In the literature, James is actually an experimental steam engine where they modified him and added those two leading wheels up front, but the real Class 28 was an 060. So as far as the Class 28 goes, they were built between 1909 and 1912. And there were 20 new builds of the Class 28, but 63 were rebuilt from Class 27 steam locomotives. So there was a total of 83 that were considered Class 28. And as we said earlier, those ran on the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway. The Class 28s were withdrawn from service between 1936 and 1957, and all of them were scrapped, so I don't believe there were any surviving examples of the Class 28. Okay, so let's talk about James here. So we're going to move from the kind of the bottom rear of the tender end and then move forward. So here you can see, again, James is a tendered engine, so he has a tender back here. This is a 6-wheel tender. The kind of the bottom frame is in the suspension is in gray plastic. We have metal wheels. We have a hook and loop coupler with the buffer is kind of stem there is molded in plastic, and then it's capped off with a black pad. You can see that the shape of the tender has a little scalloping here in the front and the back top corners. Nice number 5 there in yellow with a little black outline around the number. And then you've got this nice black pinstriping here, kind of around the side here, and then, follows the scalloping, which is nice. As we move forward, there's not a ton of detail to really talk about here on James. You can see this kind of circular, cab area here with the black pinstriping, kind of following the contours of the cab. We've got the 6 drive wheels down here. The linkage is kind of up there near the top, so I don't know if it's going to be super visible on camera, but the wheels are gray, and they're metal as well. The 2 leading wheels here, again painted gray, metal wheels. And then you've got these kind of fender structures here, wheel wells up here on the decking. Got a red painted stripe along the deck. The top of the deck is a gray color. And you got the boiler with some pipe work kind of molded in. You've got your train whistle here at the top. Hopefully you can see that in profile. And then you've got some gold pinstriping here kind of going over this end of the boiler here. You've got a brass colored steam dome. The front of the boiler is painted black with a black chimney. And then again in profile here, visible, I'll mention it, you'll see it better from the front, but you've got one lantern here. And then in the front, you've got you'll see it in profile here, the red buffer stem here, and then the black buffer pad up there. And then in front, you've got a utility hook and obviously the buffer on the opposite side. All right, let's give it a turn. All right, looking from the back, it's just a kind of a flat red, well, it's a glossy red paint job. By flat, I mean no detail here really on the back of the tender. You've got your, like I said, your hook and loop coupler, buffers, an airline, and then a gray plastic utility hook. I don't think there's too much else you can see here. The inside of the scalloping here is painted black, and you can probably see the coal load there on the top. Let's continue to turn. Okay, looking at James from the opposite side here, mirror image. Yeah, this is looking exactly the same as the opposite side. The only exception here is that the lantern or lamp that's on the front deck there is on the opposite side. And really, you can just see a lantern post or a lamp post there. But otherwise, it looks exactly the same as the opposite side. You can get a better look at the linkage here. On this side, the linkage connecting the drive wheels is a little bit lower on this side. But yeah. All right, let's give it a turn. All right, looking at James from the front. You can see here, again, the front buffers, front utility hook there. You've got the lantern or lamp and the other two lamp posts. And then, of course, you've got James' smiling face. Now, on these Bachmann HO scale Thomas locomotives, the eyes will traverse back and forth when they're on the layout, and you'll see that today when we take it for its run. And again, from the front here, you should be able to see the kind of these windows here. They're rectangular, but they kind of angle down with the slope of the boiler. And they're black with a little gold trim in there, or brass trim, which is kind of nice. Chimney, yeah, pretty good looking model. All right, let's bring it full circle. If I didn't mention it earlier, James comes in with the locomotive and the tender just a little bit under 8 inches. So it's looks to be about 7 3/4 inches long. The tender does detach from the engine. So we'll go ahead and detach that, and then we'll give you a top and bottom look at both the tender and the locomotive. Okay, looking at James's tender from the top, we'll start with that. We have a coal load in here, which is really the primary feature here to see from the top. That scalloping I mentioned earlier, the curved shape from the side of the tender, only one actually carries its circular shape all the way through. The other side, while the sides, the red sides are scallop shaped, the actual back is a step up. It's not really a curved area there. So there's that. But otherwise, there's not too much to see at the top. Coal load's probably, like I said, the most interesting feature there. So let's take a look at the bottom. Okay, looking at the bottom, not a lot of detail to see here. The bottom flooring or deck is gray plastic. We've got the hook and loop coupler, buffers, and then we've got the 6 wheels here on the bottom, and those wheels are metal. And then you've got the Bachmann logoing, corporate logo and information there stamped into the bottom of the plastic. There's a couple of screws down there to open this up in case you need to make any repairs or for whatever reason. And then there's a little post here, and that is where the kind of the tongue on, there's like a tongue on the engine with a circular hole in it that you kind of fit over that post to couple the locomotive and the tender together. Okay, looking at James from the top, you can see here that, obviously the nice red paint job, the black painting on the front of the boiler and on the roof of the cab. Then we also have some nice white or kind of grayish almost piping going up either side of the boiler near the top. We have a brass steam dome. And earlier I had mentioned that this structure was a train whistle. That's usually where it is on all the other locomotives. But here, the train whistle is actually on the top of the roof there. You can see that brass colored structure up there. And also from the top view here, you can see the kind of off-white or gray decking and the wheel wells for the drive wheels down there. You get a nice top view here of the lantern post and the lantern. But other than that, there's not a whole lot to see, just to give you a look there. One thing I did want to mention is that earlier, if anybody's seen the Thomas video that we did, where we showed the 3 versions of Thomas, we had said that Thomas was one of the only models that doesn't have a front hook and loop coupler on the locomotive. And so we went back to our collection to see if that was actually true. And James does not have a front hook and loop coupler, and neither does Percy. So there's just some correction here that we just wanted to throw in there. Up in the front here, you can see that gray utility hook, kind of a fake airline, buffers, and then the lantern post. Get a nice look there. And then you've got these kind of supporting structures out here on the front of the deck, extending from the bottom of the boiler. And in the back, this is that kind of tongue coupler there with the hole in it. That's the thing that you put the post from the tender through to couple it to the locomotive. And then as far as the cab goes, there's not a lot of detail on these locomotives. That's probably appropriate to the price point of these. But you can see here the back of the cab has just a black, just a black surface there. And then there's no detailing inside the cab. There's just kind of a scalloped out or kind of rounded out area there for that. Okay, let's check out the bottom. So on the bottom here, we have, again, the metal drive wheels. The little motor compartment here has some access screws so that in case you need to do any work or access the motor area for servicing, oiling, whatever, you get your screws there. There's a few pairs of screws around. You've got your 2 leading wheels here, and they just kind of pivot on a point here. I don't know if I can get my pointer in there, but yeah, you see that. And then you've got your Bachmann logoing down on the bottom there. So yeah, not super interesting, but just to give you a quick look at the bottom of the locomotive. All right, there you have it. Bachmann's HO James from the Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends universe. So next up is the Busy Bee James. So the first question that has to come to mind is, how did James come about to be painted in this bumblebee paint scheme? Well, it happened in an episode called The Green Controller, where Percy somehow becomes in charge of the railroad. And so he comments to James that he's a busy bee, and James agrees, and somehow they painted him in a busy bee paint scheme. So it only lasted for 1 episode, so I believe. So I'm not sure how Bachmann decided to create a whole model of James as a busy bee, because it was for such a short amount of time in the series. But anyway, here we are. So this is kind of a cool paint scheme here. Again, he retains the number 5. And the big difference here between this and the red James is that aside from the actual paint scheme, he actually has black metal wheels. The red James we just looked at had gray metal wheels, and then also the tongue of the coupler there is also black versus gray on the red James. Those are primarily the big differences between the Busy Bee James and the red James. So we're not going to go into a detailed look here because we just did that with the red James. So we're just going to do a quick spin here and just show you all sides of the Busy Bee paint scheme here. So why don't we give it a spin. Okay, as we turn and we look at the rear of the Busy Bee James, there's not a whole lot of the paint job I don't think you can see here, but one of the things we want to point out is another difference between the red James that we just saw and the Busy Bee James is that the utility hook in the back is actually black, whereas it's gray on the red James. All right, let's continue to turn. Okay, and as we turn, you can see the opposite side of James here. Again, a mirror image of the opposite side, so there's nothing really new to see here. Again, the lamp is just on the opposite side of the front of the locomotive deck. Otherwise, here you're just seeing a lamp post, but that's really the only difference here. Let's continue to turn. Okay, as we look at the front of James, again, I just want to point out here that on these HO, Bachmann, Thomas locomotives, the eyes traverse. Structurally, all three versions of James that we're looking at today are identical. It's really just the paint job and maybe just some of these plastic parts here that might be different from engine to engine. So yeah. All right, let's bring it full circle. So there you have it. That's Busy Bee James. Now, one thing I want to mention is that it's a little unclear to us whether this is a special or limited edition James. We got this, I think, in 2021. And you can still get it today on Amazon for $91.67. So I'm not sure if it'll be discontinued anytime soon, but yeah, if you were interested in purchasing something like this, again, not clear whether it's a limited release or not. Okay, next up is Origin James. Now, the reason that he's referred to as Origin James is because this is actually the original paint job that he had when he first arrived on the island of Sodor in the literature. So he came with this black paint job, and then soon after that, he was repainted to the red color that I think most people are familiar with, and the engine that we started off on in this video. Okay, so as you can see here, his primary color is black, obviously, and then in the red James, he has the black pinstriping going, you know, along the outlines of the tender and the engine. But here on the black Origin James, he has the red pinstriping going around. And then instead of the brass paint job of the strapping going across the engine here, that's red as well. Other than that, the difference here between the red James that we saw earlier and this James is that it has the black wheels, the black hook, and the black tongue here for the coupler. Consistent with actually the Busy Bee James. It's the same kind of chassis, if you will, for that. So, oh, and then the black here with the suspension and all that. So that's the main difference. All right, let's give it a turn. All right, looking at Origin James from the rear. Another difference here is that on this engine here, the pinstriping is carried over to the back of the tender, and it's not carried over on the back of the tender on the other two. So this one has the pinstriping. In addition to that, there's also this little painted detail here of a rear lamp for the tender as well. That's not a molded piece, although that would be cool if that were a molded piece of detail, but that's just painted on. So that's another difference between Origin James and Busy Bee James and the original James. All right, let's give it a spin. And here, we won't spend too much time over here. This side here is a mirror image of the opposite side. The only big difference here is that the lamp or lantern is on the opposite side of the decking here. On this side here, you can see the lamp post. All right, let's give it a spin. All right, and here's James from the front. And you can see the face here again, these Bachmann HO Thomas locomotives, the eyes traverse when they're on the layout, which you'll see in just a few minutes. But there's a good look from the front, and one final turn to bring it all the way around. All right, that's Origin James. All right, and there you have it. All three versions of the Bachmann HO scale Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends Universe James. We have the traditional James in the red that you see On most of the TV shows and books, that's the most common James. And then you've got the Busy Bee James, and you've got Origin James in the black paint scheme. Let's take them out in the layout and see how they look.